What exactly is free will, and why do we even care about it? At first glance, it seems obvious that we have free will. You wake up in the morning and decide whether to hit snooze or get up. You pick what to eat, what to wear, what to do with your life. Every moment is filled with choices, and it feels like you're the one making them. But here's the problem. Just because something feels true doesn't mean it actually is. And for centuries, philosophers, scientists, and theologians have been arguing about whether our choices are truly our own, or if they were always going to happen, no matter what. So, what does free will even mean? Most people would say it's the ability to make choices independently, without being forced by outside forces or pre-existing conditions. In other words, you are in control of your own decisions. Not fate, not physics, not some divine script that was written before you were born. But here's where things get complicated. If everything that happens has a cause, if every action is the result of something that came before it, then doesn't that mean our choices were always going to happen that way? If you trace every decision you've ever made back far enough, can you ever find a moment where something could have gone differently? Or was it all just a chain reaction set into motion long before you ever existed? This is why the question of free will matters. If we don't truly have it, then what does that say about responsibility? Are we really accountable for our actions if we were never truly choosing them? What about morality? Can we blame people for doing wrong if they were always destined to act that way? And even more unsettling, if we don't have free will, then what is the self? Are we just complex biological machines, running on a script we don't even realize exists? But before we go too deep, let's pause and acknowledge something important. This debate isn't just about philosophy. Science has now entered the discussion, and what it has found is, well, troubling. Some experiments suggest that our brains make decisions before we are even conscious of them. Physics tells us that the universe runs on strict laws of cause and effect. And even psychology argues that we are shaped by forces we rarely notice: our genes, our upbringing, our environment. So, as we move forward, we have to ask, is free will just an illusion? Or is there a way to break free from the idea that everything is already determined? The answers might change the way you see yourself forever. What if I told you that by the time you think you've made a decision, your brain has already made it for you? That's exactly what some scientists argue. Back in the 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet ran an experiment that shook the very foundation of free will. He asked participants to move their fingers whenever they felt like it, while measuring their brain activity. The shocking part? The brain's motor cortex showed activity before the person consciously decided to move. In other words, their brain had already started the process before they were even aware of making a decision. This suggests something unsettling. What if the choices we think we're making are just post-rationalizations? What if our brain decides first, and then our conscious mind invents the feeling of making a decision afterward? If that's true, then what does that mean for free will? Some neuroscientists argue that this proves free will is just an illusion. We aren't choosing anything. We're just experiencing a pre-programmed sequence of events. The brain is like a complex machine, running computations in the background, and what we call choice is just the output of that process. But hold on, does that mean we're all just robots running on autopilot? Not necessarily. Some argue that even if our decisions are made subconsciously first, awareness of them still gives us some control. Maybe free will isn't about making decisions from scratch, but about influencing or vetoing decisions before they're fully executed. In other words, we might not be initiating choices, but we might have the power to redirect them. Then again, if everything in our brains operates according to biology, chemistry, and physics, then are we really any different from machines? A computer follows its programming. A plant grows towards sunlight because of its biology. A bird migrates due to instinct. And we, as humans, might just be running our own kind of sophisticated program, a program built from genetics, life experiences, and neural pathways. This raises an even bigger question. If we are just biological machines following deterministic laws, then is anyone truly responsible for their actions? If a criminal was always going to commit a crime because of their brain chemistry and life circumstances, can they really be blamed? If someone does something heroic, is it really their choice, or just the inevitable result of everything that came before? And if all of this is true, then what does that say about you? Are you in control, or are you just watching the choices that were always going to happen anyway? If everything in the universe follows strict laws of cause and effect, then does that mean every decision we make was already set in motion long before we even existed? Imagine you set up a long line of dominoes, you tip the first one over, and the rest fall in perfect sequence. Now, ask yourself, does any domino in that chain choose to fall? Of course not. Each one falls because of the one before it. And once the first domino is tipped, the rest of the sequence is inevitable. Now, what if I told you that the entire universe, including you, might be working the same way? This is the foundation of determinism, the idea that everything that happens is caused by something before it. In a purely deterministic universe, there's no such thing as an independent choice. Your thoughts, actions, and emotions are just the inevitable result of all the physical processes that came before. The way you reacted to something this morning, determined by your past experiences, your brain chemistry, the electrical signals in your neurons. The fact that you're reading this right now, a consequence of events that stretch back through time, from your childhood to the formation of the Earth itself. This idea isn't just philosophy, it's built into the fabric of classical physics. Isaac Newton's laws describe a universe that operates like a massive, perfectly ordered machine. If you know the state of something at one point in time, like the speed and direction of a planet, you can predict exactly where it will be in the future. And if the same applies to particles in your brain, then theoretically, if someone had all the data, the position and motion of every atom in existence, they could predict everything that will ever happen, including what you'll do next. So, does that mean we're just watching a movie that was already written? Maybe, but there's a twist. Some physicists argue that at the smallest levels, reality isn't quite as predictable as we once thought. Quantum mechanics introduces an element of randomness. Particles behave in ways that seem completely unpredictable. Some take this as evidence that the universe isn't fully determined, and if reality has randomness built into it, maybe free will has a chance. But here's the problem. Randomness alone doesn't give us free will. If something happens because of randomness, that's still not you making a decision, it's just chance taking over. So even if quantum physics introduces some uncertainty, that doesn't necessarily mean we have control over our own actions. And this brings us to the ultimate question. If every thought and action is just the result of prior causes or random quantum fluctuations, then where, exactly, is there room for free will? Is there any part of us that stands outside this chain of events, capable of choosing in a way that wasn't predetermined by something else? Or are we all just dominoes, falling one after another in a sequence that was set in motion billions of years ago? So far, we've been looking at a universe that seems rigid and predictable, every action leading to the next like a line of dominoes. But what if reality isn't as structured as we think? What if, deep down, the universe has built-in uncertainty? Could that uncertainty give us free will? Enter quantum mechanics, the branch of physics that describes the behavior of the tiniest particles in existence. Unlike the predictable world of classical physics, the quantum world is bizarre, unpredictable, and, frankly, downright confusing. At the quantum level, particles don't behave like little billiard balls bouncing around in a deterministic way. Instead, they exist in multiple states at once, only choosing a definite state when they are observed. One of the most famous examples of this weirdness is Schrödinger's cat. Imagine a cat inside a box with a quantum-triggered device that could either release poison or do nothing, depending on the behavior of a subatomic particle. Until we open the box and observe what happened, the cat exists in a strange state of being both alive and dead at the same time. It's only when we observe it that the universe seems to decide on an outcome. This raises a fascinating question. If quantum events aren't strictly determined, could our choices also be unpredictable in the same way? Could our consciousness somehow interact with this fundamental randomness, giving us the ability to make choices that aren't dictated by past events? Some physicists and philosophers think this might be a loophole for free will, a way for something truly new to happen in an otherwise deterministic universe. But here's the problem. Even if quantum mechanics introduces randomness, does that really mean we have free will? After all, randomness isn't the same as choice. If your decisions were purely random, like a dice roll, that wouldn't make you free. It would just make you unpredictable. Free will, as we typically think of it, requires something more than just randomness. It requires agency, the ability to direct and control our actions with purpose. Still, some researchers believe that quantum effects in the brain could play a role in how we make decisions. The idea, sometimes called quantum consciousness, suggests that our thoughts might not be purely the result of classical cause and effect, but could involve unpredictable quantum processes. If true, this would mean our brains aren't just predictable machines, but something more mysterious, something that might have the ability to break free from strict determinism. Of course, this is still highly speculative. Many scientists believe that whatever randomness quantum mechanics introduces doesn't scale up to affect human decision-making in any meaningful way. To them, whether the universe is deterministic or slightly random doesn't matter. Either way, it doesn't give us true free will. So, where does that leave us? If the universe is purely deterministic, free will seems impossible. If the universe contains some randomness, free will still seems out of reach. But maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe the real mystery isn't whether free will exists, but whether we can ever truly know the difference between a world where we have it and a world where we don't. And that thought alone might be enough to keep us questioning forever. Enjoying the conversation so far? I would like to know your thoughts on the topic. Comment down below if you think free will exists or not. And while you're at it, like the video and hit that subscribe button, like you were always meant to do, and change the trajectory of your life forever. Let's take a step away from science for a moment and look at something just as fascinating: fate. Because while physics and neuroscience try to explain our choices in terms of natural laws, many religions and philosophies have long suggested something even more unsettling. What if everything that happens was always meant to happen? Predestination is the idea that every event in our lives, every success, every failure, every moment of joy or pain was already determined long before we even existed. Some believe this plan comes from a divine being, while others see it as the natural unfolding of a cosmic order. Either way, it raises an enormous question. If our lives are already written, do we really have a say in how they unfold? Think about it. If everything is predetermined, then when you decided what to eat for breakfast this morning, was that truly your choice? Or was it just another chapter in a book that had already been written? If fate is real, then every decision you make, every thought you have, is simply a step toward an outcome that was always going to happen. And that's unsettling. Many religions grapple with this paradox. In Christianity, some interpretations of predestination suggest that God has already chosen who will be saved and who won't, regardless of personal choices. But that raises a moral dilemma. If we have no control over our fate, how can we be held accountable for our actions? In Hinduism and Buddhism, karma plays a role in shaping destiny, with past actions influencing future lives. But again, if our current actions are shaped by our past, how much of our present self is really free? And then, there's the idea of fatalism, which takes things a step further. Fatalism doesn't just suggest that events are predetermined. It suggests that no matter what we do, we can't change anything. If something is meant to happen, it will, and if it isn't, no amount of effort will make a difference. It's the idea that we are passengers on a train that can't switch tracks, only watch as the scenery passes by. But here's where it gets interesting. What if fate and free will aren't opposites? Some philosophies argue that fate sets the big picture, but within that, we still have free will to decide how we experience it. Maybe we don't choose the destination, but we do choose how we walk the path. Maybe certain key events in our lives are set in stone, but the details, how we respond, what we learn, who we become, are still in our hands. So, is life a script that we are simply acting out? Or is it more like an improv performance, where the framework is set, but we still get to decide how we play our part? And if we are following a pre-written story, who or what is the author? Maybe, in the end, the only real way to know is to keep turning the pages and see where the story leads. What if the reason free will feels like an illusion is because it actually is? What if our entire existence is nothing more than a highly advanced simulation, one where we only think we have control? I know it sounds like something straight out of the Matrix, but simulation theory is more than just science fiction. It's a serious philosophical and scientific argument that has gained traction in recent years. It suggests that we might be living inside a highly complex computer program, where everything, from the laws of physics to our own thoughts, is generated by some kind of advanced intelligence. If that's true, then our sense of free will could be nothing more than a programmed illusion. The modern version of this idea comes from philosopher Nick Bostrom, who proposed a thought experiment. If a civilization ever becomes advanced enough to run perfect, detailed simulations of conscious beings, then there's a high chance that simulated worlds vastly outnumber real ones. If that's the case, the odds that we are in the one real reality are incredibly low. In other words, if it's possible to create simulations, then it's almost certain that we're already inside one. But let's pause for a second. How would we even know? Some scientists have actually searched for glitches in the fabric of reality, looking for inconsistencies in physical laws or patterns in cosmic radiation that might hint at underlying code. So far, no concrete evidence has been found, but that doesn't mean the theory is dead. Some argue that quantum mechanics itself, the weird randomness we talked about earlier, could be a sign that our reality isn't entirely real. After all, in video games, randomness is often used to create the illusion of an organic, unpredictable world. And here's where it gets even creepier. If we are in a simulation, that means there could be a programmer, a being or civilization that created this reality for some unknown purpose. Are they simply observing us, running an experiment? Are we entertainment for a higher intelligence? Or worse, what if we're just non-playable characters, NPCs, in someone else's game, believing we're making choices when, in reality, we're just following a script? This idea raises massive questions about free will. If everything we do is programmed, then choice is nothing more than an illusion. Our thoughts and actions are just pre-coded responses. But even if that's true, does it change anything? If we feel like we're making choices, does it really matter whether those choices are real or not? Maybe the experience of free will is enough, even if it's part of the program. And then there's the biggest question of all. If we are in a simulation, can we escape? Maybe, just maybe, waking up isn't about taking the red pill. Maybe it's about questioning the reality around us and realizing that, even if we are in a simulation, we still have one undeniable truth. We are experiencing something. And in the end, maybe that's all that really matters. Alright, let's flip this whole thing upside down. So far, we've been asking whether free will is an illusion because the universe is deterministic, random, or maybe even simulated. But what if we're looking at it all wrong? What if we are the ones shaping reality, consciously or unconsciously? This idea takes us into the mysterious world of consciousness. Unlike a computer or a machine that simply follows instructions, consciousness gives us the ability to experience, to feel, to perceive, to be aware of ourselves as individuals. And that awareness changes everything. One of the most mind-bending ideas in quantum physics is the observer effect. Scientists have found that when they observe particles at the quantum level, the mere act of looking changes how those particles behave. In other words, reality doesn't seem to settle into a definite state until consciousness interacts with it. This raises a huge question. If observation influences reality, does that mean our minds play a role in shaping the physical world? Some theories suggest that consciousness isn't just something that exists within the universe. It's actually fundamental to reality itself. The consciousness creates reality hypothesis argues that without an observer, the universe remains in an undefined potential state. This would mean that the choices we make aren't just responses to a pre-existing world, they actually bring that world into existence. Of course, this idea is controversial. Many scientists argue that consciousness is simply the product of the brain, a sophisticated illusion created by neurons firing in complex patterns. But if consciousness is just a function of the brain, then it too would be subject to determinism, meaning we still wouldn't have free will. But here's where it gets even weirder. Some philosophers argue that instead of consciousness being created by the brain, it might be fundamental to the universe itself, almost like a field of energy that everything taps into. This idea is known as panpsychism, and it suggests that consciousness isn't just a property of humans, but something embedded in reality itself, from atoms to galaxies. If that's true, and maybe free will isn't about fighting against a deterministic universe, maybe it's about aligning ourselves with the creative force that shapes reality. Instead of being passive observers, we might be active participants in the unfolding of existence. So, what does this mean for free will? If reality is shaped by consciousness, then perhaps the question isn't whether we have free will, but how much of it we are aware of. Are we simply reacting to unconscious programming, or are we capable of waking up to the deeper truth that our awareness itself might be the force behind everything? And if that's the case, then the real challenge isn't proving free will exists. It's figuring out how to use it. If we do have free will, if consciousness is more than just an illusion, then the real question isn't whether we have it, but how we can actually use it. Because, let's be honest, most of the time, we don't feel like we're making fully conscious choices. We wake up, scroll our phones, go through our routines, react to situations, follow habits, almost like we're running on autopilot. If free will exists, why does it feel like we're so often not in control? The answer might lie in awareness. Many philosophers and spiritual traditions suggest that free will isn't something we just have by default. It's something we have to wake up to. If our thoughts and behaviors are shaped by habits, emotions, and unconscious patterns, then true free will might not be about making random choices, but about learning to see and shape those patterns consciously. Step 1. Recognizing the illusions. The first step in using free will is recognizing what controls us. Think about how much of our behavior is dictated by past experiences, social conditioning, fears, and desires we don't fully understand.
If we're reacting to situations based on programming we've absorbed throughout life, are we really making choices? Or are we just playing out scripts that were written for us by society, our upbringing, and past experiences?
Take decision-making, for example. Let's say you get angry at someone. Did you choose to get angry, or did it just happen automatically? If it was automatic, was it truly your choice? The more we question why we do what we do, the more we start seeing the invisible forces shaping us. Step 2. The power of observation. This is where things get interesting. Many traditions, from Buddhism to modern psychology, suggest that awareness itself changes everything. The moment you observe a habit, thought, or impulse, instead of just acting on it, you create space. And in that space, you gain the power to decide. Imagine a moment where you're about to react in frustration or follow an old habit. If you can pause, even for just a few seconds, you can actually see the process unfolding. In that moment, you're no longer just a passenger in your brain's automatic responses. You've stepped into the driver's seat. This is why meditation and mindfulness are often linked to greater self-control. They help us develop the ability to notice our thoughts and emotions instead of just being swept away by them. The more we observe, the more we realize that we aren't just the impulses, we're the one watching them. And that realization alone gives us more freedom. Step 3. Rewriting the script. If our behaviors and choices are influenced by past conditioning, then using free will might be about rewiring that conditioning. Instead of being controlled by unconscious habits, we can actively choose which habits and beliefs to reinforce. This is where neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, comes in. Studies show that we can actually rewire our brains by consciously choosing new patterns of thought and action. Every time we make a choice that goes against an old habit, we weaken the old neural pathways and strengthen new ones. In other words, choice itself is like a muscle. The more we use it, the stronger it becomes. So, what does this mean for free will? It suggests that we might not start out fully free, but we can become freer over time by developing awareness and making conscious decisions. Maybe free will isn't an on or off switch. It's a skill we can practice and refine. Step 4. Aligning with intention. The final piece of the puzzle is knowing what we actually want. A lot of the time, we struggle with choice because we're not clear on our true desires. We get pulled in different directions by social expectations, fears, distractions. If we want to use our free will meaningfully, we have to get clear on what matters most to us. Some traditions call this living with intention or conscious creation. Instead of letting life happen to us, we set a direction based on what we truly value. Every choice we make either brings us closer to or further from that path. The more intentional we are, the more power we have over our own destiny. So, do we have free will? Maybe free will isn't about always making conscious choices. It's about learning how to make more of them. Maybe we start out controlled by unconscious forces, but through awareness, observation, and intention, we gain more power over our own lives. So, the real question isn't, do we have free will? It's, are we using it? And if we aren't, what would happen if we did? So here we are, After all these questions, theories, and mind-bending possibilities, what can we say about free will? Do we have it? Or is it just an illusion? If we've learned anything, it's that this question isn't as simple as a yes or no. Science tells us that much of what we do is shaped by unconscious processes, genetics, and physics. Philosophy warns us that even if we feel free, that might just be part of the illusion. And yet, despite all of that, there's still something undeniable about the experience of choosing, something real about the moments when we pause, reflect, and step outside of our automatic responses. Maybe free will isn't about absolute freedom, where we can do anything at any time, with no influences. Maybe it's about relative freedom, about increasing the space between impulse and action, between conditioning and awareness. The more conscious we become, the more control we seem to have over our own destiny. And maybe that's the real paradox of free will. It's not something we either have or don't have. It's something we must wake up to, something we must cultivate. At any given moment, we can either act from unconscious programming, or we can step into awareness and choose. So, after everything we've explored, maybe the most important question: what will you choose to do with the freedom you have? And perhaps, choosing to choose this freedom is proof enough that free will exists.